Hey, welcome back to the bench. Geekvape sent me their new Legend 2. And look, I reckon they probably want me to talk about review stuff. Like screen quality and features and all that stuff. So anyway, let's take it apart. No, actually, before I start, the one thing I was thinking though is it's kind of too pretty to be a tough mod. The Aegis line is always meant to be shockproof and waterproof and tough mod and take it anywhere and all that sort of stuff. I don't really want to take it anywhere. I just want to be nice to it and stick it on my bench. Features, normal stuff. I don't know. Look up another review if you're keen. It does stuff. It fires an atomizer. It's basically, they're all the same these days. Now, with this device, main things I'm interested in are actually the build quality in relation to the original Legend. And that's going to be mainly relating to this top plate and the way sort of the electrical assembly is done in the top here. Now, I don't know if it's a product of the fact that they sold a lot of original Aegis Legends. It's been a super popular device. They sold, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of them. When that happens, when a device is really popular, you do tend to see more reports of issues. And it can kind of skew how many it looks like they're having. So it can be only, a completely normal failure rate and not many at all, but just the sheer number of devices out there, you're going to see more of it reported. I don't know. I don't obviously have any solid numbers on any of that stuff. But I did see a fair number of issues with the Legend reported. We're relating to the battery, the battery readings. People would have one battery reading empty while the other was full. And this was with two full cells. So basically the device had either lost the balancing line from the cell, so it couldn't tell that the other cell was full or what its level was. And that means it wouldn't fire. It would just say battery error because it's seeing that one cell's completely empty, you can't tell. And battery error. So that basically made the device unusable. I did see a fair number of atomizer errors as well. So it reading atomizer short or something like that was a fairly common complaint. But actually go back to the Aegis X video I did, because the Legend and the X, original Legend and the X are pretty much the same, in that this top assembly is really, really kind of complicated and a bit overly busy with how it's designed. Just lots of stuff going on there. And it had this plastic plate that sat underneath the metal plate, and it was kind of screwed together but not well, and it would you could see it starting to bend apart under spring tension. So I got my issues with got my doubts about the reliability of that top part, and I reckon a lot of the problems might have been stemming from just the lack of reliability in that top plate, or sort of anything going wrong with that top plate. As far as the battery balance issues go, the battery monitoring or balance wire coming up from the bottom battery contact, had to go all the way up through the frame of the mod, and it would wrap around the top, sort of near this plate, and then it would go all the way back down to the board where it was attached. So you'd have this huge loop of battery monitor wire, and one of mine was pinched, so it was definitely pinched. That wire had been squashed the way it had been put together, and if that wire is touching frame anywhere, it's kind of going to short out your cell, but also it'll play havoc with the battery monitoring connection, because it won't be reading proper battery voltage. It'll be pulling it down to ground and messing it up. So it was a little sketchy on that, the way it's never good when you have to loop a long wire all the way through the device, especially if it's a thin wire that can kind of get caught up on stuff, and they're fairly delicate. So what we want to do is compare the way it's all put together, just see how that matches up with the Legend, whether they've made some improvements. Hopefully they have, to try and increase the reliability, because they're supposed to be a tough device, and it doesn't help you if the device is tough if you've got issues where there's design faults inside the device and the device just becomes faulty by itself. All the shock protection in the world's not going to help you if you got that sort of stuff going on. Now, the second thing I want to talk about just quickly is Battery life. So the original Legend, way back when it first came out, was having battery issues, not errors, but battery life issues. People were finding that it wasn't giving the same number of puffs as other dual 18650 devices they had. So it was falling way short on the puffs, like something like 20-30%. People were saying, and it was quite a big rumor, big discussion point on the forums for a while. There, people saying, "Oh, I want to get this new Legend because it was one of the first sort of shockproof, waterproof kind of tough devices. I want to get one of these new Legends, but what's going on with the battery life? I'm not going to buy one if it doesn't have the battery life, if there's something wrong there." So I did a couple of tests on it, so I want to figure out what the hell's going on. I bought two of them. Well, I bought two because I stuffed one of them up. But anyway, I did get to the bottom of it. What they were doing is the little microcontroller inside on the board that runs basically everything, the intelligence of the board. There's different operating modes as far as power and standby. So you've got active mode where it's actually doing something, and that's when you're firing or adjusting the menus or doing something. It's actively doing something, processing, driving the screen, deciding how to fire the voltage converter, doing all that sort of stuff while you're firing. That's basically active mode. Then there is standby mode, but sort of active standby. So it's not currently doing anything, but it is sitting there in an active mode, waiting to do something. In that case, the board will be drawing a non-negligible amount of current. So I think on the Legend, I was measuring right off the top of my head, somewhere around like 80 milliamps or 100 milliamps. So it's not huge, nothing like how much current you're using to fire an atomizer or a coil, but it's definitely not zero. Like, that is still some current over time. It would stay in this active standby mode for about 10 minutes. So every time you press the button, well, from when you say stop pressing the button and it had nothing to do, it would sit there in this active mode for about 10 minutes, just using this 100 milliamps. Now, over the day, if you're taking regular puffs, it means it's going to stay in that kind of active standby mode for like maybe the majority of the day. I did calculate that could have been up to like probably around 10 or 15% of your battery life over a day. It could take somewhere around that. Go back to the test and check those numbers if you're interested. So that was a contributing factor, and the other factor I found was that the battery meter was quite far out. So it would get down to 0 bars, and it was still 3.5 volts. Still had a fair bit, say 0.2 volt left to cut off, and it wasn't quite accurate. And I think people were looking at it getting down to 1 bar out of 4, and thinking, oh, my batteries are just about dead. 1 bar out of 5, however many they have on the little display there, and not running it all the way down to the battery cutoff, which was a fair way below once the battery meter was completely empty. Interestingly, I'm going to give myself a bit of a rap here because I think I did help Geekvape, because they came out with a firmware update for the original Legend, and lo and behold, they did exactly everything that I said would fix the device, which was recalibrate the battery display so it's actually showing empty when it's empty and not way before, and get rid of that active standby time for so long. Doesn't need to sit there for 10 minutes waiting for something to do before going into full standby. Oh, sorry, I should clarify that once that 10 minutes was up, it would go into a full standby mode, where basically like a sleep mode, where that little microcontroller inside would go into full sleep and shut everything down. In that case, it's drawing like microamps, and that's what you want. You want it sitting there when it's not doing anything, basically drawing nothing. And all the issues went away, and everyone happily bought Legends. So Geekvape, you owe me for helping you with your device. Oh, well, you got to take a bit of credit somewhere. I spent all my own money buying 2 of those mods. We're going to check that as well on this device to make sure there hasn't been any regressions, that they haven't gone back to, for whatever reason, the new engineers missed the memo that don't leave it on standby for 10 minutes and get the battery meter right, because you never know. Sometimes that can happen. Yeah, so let's pull this thing apart. Let's have a look what's inside it. Now, I think it might be a bit of a pain to get apart because it should be all sealed. I believe that the ingress rating of this device is actually a grade higher than the Legend. So if anything, the sealing should be more comprehensive. I know the original Legend did have an issue where it would get moisture under the screen, which wasn't the screen. People thought it was going in the LCD, and it wasn't, because there was an outer layer. It looks very, very similar on the Legend to this guy, the Legend 2, where the outer plastic is just a cover, and the screen itself, it was underneath that, under another cover. So there was a sealed section that the screen was underneath, and the top piece that was on the very outside was just there for protection, basically, and wasn't part of the seal. But they would get liquid under there, and that annoyed the hell out of everyone, and rightly so. But I say, even though they're rated as a waterproof device, don't just go dunking it in liquid just for the hell of it. Like, nothing's ever 100%, and if you dick around with it just over time, and liquid will eventually get in somewhere if you dunk this enough times, just to be a smart ass and just do it because you can. I wouldn't suggest that. But I mean, it's great to know that whatever happens during the day, you've got a sealed device, so if it gets wet, get something spilled on it, take it fishing or whatever. Now, none of these devices are made for user serviceability, so I don't particularly advocate taking things apart if you don't know what you're doing. But, if you're going to anyway and you're asking, these are T6. I get these little Torx drivers in a set. Funnily enough, one set I had with a T6 wouldn't fit, but this set does. So it's handy to have a set of all different sizes. Maybe a T5 and the other set would have worked. But I didn't check that. Now, it will be a little bit more difficult, I presume, to get the Legend 2 apart, because it is a sealed, waterproof, dustproof, well, not proof, but resistant to whatever rating, IP something. Because of the seals, there should be silicon seals or O-rings or gaskets or things going on, which probably will make it a little bit more difficult to get apart. And once you do take it apart, it will probably never go back sealed the same way. Like, you'll break any silicon seals that have been done with like liquid sealant that they did on the original Legend. Once you pop that seal, it's a real pain in the ass to try and reseal it. Probably will never be the same again. So, I mean, if you wanted to take it apart to hopefully try and fix something or do something to it, you could reseal it. If you got some, I would say I would use like 3-bond white, the engine sealant, or another neutral cure silicon, something like that. Gasket maker, or I would say something auto would probably work, but it would be a messy pain in the ass of a job, to be honest. The Legend was a full metal case, full metal frame. Like, all this through here was metal, and this is not. This is sort of a more traditional outer metal frame, presuming that's metal. It is definitely lighter and smaller than the original Legend, so it's basically pretty much the same as any other dual 18650 as far as weight and size. It's not like a big bulky unit like it was before, so you don't really have to sacrifice too much now to get that waterproof. I keep saying waterproof. It's not necessarily waterproof, it's water resistant to a certain degree, and that is completely different to the original. So on the original, that whole piece is a big assembly that comes out that's sealed into the metal, and that's just a little cosmetic bit of trim there with what I would say would be that feels like silicon. Pretty sure that's silicon compound. And now we've got some normal Phillips head screws inside, and of course they've swapped to USB-C charge port, which I'm pretty happy about these days. They seem to all be switching to that, because it's like, once a few companies do it, then everyone else switches because they don't want to miss out. But it's a good thing, because there's no polarity on it. You don't have to worry about stuffing the port by sticking the plug in the wrong way, and they do just seem a bit more durable, although it does depend on how well they attach the socket to the board itself, is a big factor in the durability. Yeah, okay, it's all completely different from the original Legend and the X. So X was very similar with its top plate assembly to the Legend and the original Legend, and this is completely different. So what do we got going on here? We have the 510. Okay, we've got sort of a split 510 arrangement, which I generally like. The ceiling arrangement here is a bit interesting. That's not particularly confidence inspiring. So this plate here is like a retention plate. It holds those springs down on the battery contacts. So they're your two battery contacts straight through there. So it's a much more simple, and it does look like a lot more robust system. Way more simple. Way more simple. So you've got your negative, your 510, back to the board. The positive 510, and would be, I hope I didn't lose anything there. Yeah, I did, spring. Don't lose that. The positive pin there, going back to the board, super simple, and just a positive and a negative for the cell. Really straightforward. Do like how much more simple that is. Now, what I am a bit concerned about is how well sealed this is to ingress. It's a lot different. Instead of having a whole plate that's completely sealed, and the original Legend did have a bead of silicon, like liquid silicon sealant they would apply to it at the factory, and then they'd screw it all down, and it would, it was like you'd have to prise the thing out of that top plate out of the device to actually break all that seal. It was pretty hardcore the way it was sealed in. And this is really, I mean, there's no seals on that plastic, and that's straight into the board. That's sort of not what I was expecting. I thought this would be really difficult to get into. It's not at all. So I'll just pop this back together for a second. Just have a little theorize. Because that plate, there's no rubber seal there. No rubber seal there. That plate itself won't seal. Not a chance. So that's not a waterproof seal at all. So we're relying 100%. Oh, really? And we're relying 100% on this silicon gasket held down by that plate to completely seal off that top area. And the device, because this goes straight into the board. The threads through that plate, through the top plate, don't go all the way through. So that's not a big deal, but because there is a hole for the screw. So if liquid goes under the head of the screw, in between that silicon. Yeah, I mean, it's got sort of nice little cutouts there. Yeah, it's actually got matching. I was kind of looking at the cutout, the shape of this hole cutout on the silicon, and thinking that's kind of a weird shape. It looks like it's really roughly punched. But actually, it's not. It's got a curved section, like a little extra section there, that fits to the shape of the plastic plate underneath. So that fits reasonably well. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just a little bit surprised. So that you can see the ridges there on that silicon. I don't know if you can see that, but there are little ridges, and that's actually your sealing kind of portion of that. Yeah, but I mean, you are entirely relying on this piece of silicon to seal the whole device. And through the 510. So if liquid goes in between, it's a pretty tight fit, but if liquid gets in between the gasket, this top silicon piece, and the 510 negative, it will just go down into the board. Yeah, there's an O-ring, a little clear silicon O-ring on the positive pin, little positive assembly there, so it should seal. I mean, most of the 510s will have that. Not overly impressed. Not overly impressed. There's no extra white, liquid sealant supplied, or double seals, or membranes, or kind of anything going on. There's just this top silicon piece does all the sealing, and of course, if you're using this charging port a lot or playing around with it, and you pull that up too far, you're going to create a gap in there, and that will let ingress liquid, anything else, go straight in. So I don't know if you can see, try to get that in the right angle. The main board is right there, so there's a gap where the wires go through to the main board, but I'm literally can see the green of the board directly behind. So it's, if liquid gets through here, what I'm saying is it's got a straight shot into the board, and actually that plate will pretty much funnel it down onto the board. Not overly impressed. Similar to the original Legend, we've got insulated battery tubes, which is always good. I do like having a, nicely fitting non-conductive tube around the cell. Of course, always check your battery wraps. If there's any nicks or tears or holes or anything, do not use the cell until you rewrap it, and especially around the top, but anywhere. Having said that, if there's one you haven't seen, because it could happen, you've got a little nick or something in the cell that you haven't seen, and you've got fully insulated, having said that, I was going to say fully insulated compartments where they can't touch, but there's a gap. Sorry. See that gap between the two cells, or open area. Technically the two cells can touch, so they can't short out to metal because there's no metal around them, they're all in plastic, but they can touch each other, which is an issue in a dual cell series mod, because the negative, the whole can of one cell will be at ground, and the can of the other cell will be at the potential of the lower cell, because they're seriesed, so the positive will connect to the negative. Now this whole outer cell can is essentially the positive of this cell, so that cannot touch that because that's at negative of this cell. Otherwise you'll be just shorting, you'll short this cell out if they touch. They cannot touch ever. So sort of a point off there for the fact they can touch. They're a little bit loosey-goosey in there, but probably fine under spring tension. But those two cells can touch each other, so they can't touch the case, they can't short out against the case, but they can touch each other. So, not absolutely ideal. Not terrible, but not ideal either. So the outer frame will come off the inner assembly reasonably easily. And it is metal. Okay. It does feel very light, but it's pretty thin. Little sneaky switch here. So this switch is a physical switch for disabling firing the device. I actually quite like this. It's handy having a device like this for when you're traveling. So if you're on and off planes and buses and stuff like that. When you go to take a vape, when you get a chance, you go outside the airport for a minute, take a vape. You want to be able to, or then put your device back in your pocket. You want to be able to flick that. Have some way of quickly turning the device off that you're not going to be pressing buttons and accidentally firing it, because it would just be like my worst nightmare that fire button actually gets held down with my device in my pocket when I'm going through like airport security or something, and my pocket starts pluming out vapor. That would just be an absolute nightmare. So I do like it when you have an easy way to turn the device off or disable it without necessarily having to take the batteries out straight away, when you can just go flick and throw it in your pocket, and then you can keep going. I do like that. Now what they've done is they put what looks like a little magnet on the side of that switch, so this switch doesn't have to be electrically wired through to the board, which saves another point of ingress. And they'll have a little read switch or a Hall effect sensor or something like that, and basically just that magnetic field. And yep, there's a little teeny tiny little magnet on there. That magnet will be over the sensor or not over the sensor, and that the magnetism will go through the plastic and tell the device, disable or enable. It's not physically cutting anything out, so all it's doing is telling the microcontroller, okay, I'm in lock mode, don't fire. It's not a physical interrupt of the current. So yeah, just not sure why that would matter a whole lot, but just so you know. So that's the battery monitoring wire, battery balance wire. It's been sealed into the plastic. So a fairly substantial amount of silicone around the battery door, and I noticed it was a fairly nice tight fit. So that should seal relatively well. And just this little silicone plug, clear silicone plug into the device, that's a bit sketchy. That's not amazing. So that must have stuck to, yeah, I saw a mark somewhere. Yeah, okay, so it's probably not too bad. It's a little clear silicone plug. It goes around that wire, and it plugs into the hole in the plastic frame. And then they've gone and whacked a bit of extra black silicone sealant around it, same as this stuff, at the same time, and then jammed the frame over it. And that's why that frame has a mark, has that stuff stuck to it as well. Must have been when it was still wet. They put that outer frame over the inner assembly, and I mean it should hold it all together. Yeah, should be okay, I guess. This little silicone plug. Yeah, sort of not amazing either. Screws there. More screws under this battery door. Once you've got this frame off, we need to take off, well, if the aim is to get to the board, we'll need to take out these two screws. There's another two screws hiding under here, but you can't get to them until you take off this hinge section of the battery door. And you can't take that hinge section off until you take the pin out. They'll give you access to two more screws under there, and then you should get access to the screws under there. And spring. Just have to make sure you get that spring in the right orientation the way back. It's got a little flat piece and a little hook. And the pin. Okay, hinge piece. Now, this is a smaller size torque, so it looks like a T4. It's very small. With these 4 screws, which are holding on the outer frame on top of the board, is a T4 Torx. Very small. Okay, so front panel coming off. And different to the original Legend in that there is not a double layer kind of system to this outer screen and then seal through to the board. It's just one piece. Now this is sealed, some kind of compound into the main part of the plastic case. But you know, if you do see moisture underneath this guy, it's actually on your board, so that is a bad sign. So it's not on the Legend, doesn't matter if there's liquid under the little front panel, but on this guy, that's definitely a sign that there's liquid inside. Yeah, I think it looks okay, that seal. It's still not as, doesn't seem as comprehensive as the Legend, where the Legend had the big thick I think it was a polycarbonate front plate, all that white silicon sealant that they'd pipe around there, I think done by machine, and then that plate pressed in, and you know, big screws and all held together. It's kind of just seems a bit lighter duty to me. It's yeah, I mean, there's sealant all the way around, so like it's probably fine. There's a recess in the plastic case where this piece fits into, so it should have a fair bit of surface area there for it to seal up into. So probably not too bad. The top is not great, but like overall, I'm happy that this is all a lot more simple. You sort of do like to see proper physical separation, or like a guide or something holding that sort of two wires apart, especially when it's battery positive, because that's main battery positive there. So that's going to be at 8.4 volts, and that's your atomizer positive. So you obviously wouldn't ever want that battery positive to short to that wire, because it would just absolutely fry your atomizer and possibly stuff your cells as well. Yeah, probably stuff your cells if you're running like a fairly low resistance coil. So that's not good news. I sort of would like to see more of a separation, or a guide or something holding that wire, because you've got a spring there as well. So that positive wire, the positive wire to the 510 is right next to that spring as well, and that spring is directly touching the positive contact, so it will be, you know, electrically connected to battery positive as well. And that atomizer 510 wire is just kind of floating around there. That's not great. See, this guy's kind of a bit better. Well, yeah, even then, that's not sort of great either. I mean, the biggest problem would be if you ever shorted this main battery negative to the main battery positive. That's yeah, that's one of the few situations where you could have thermal runaway with a cell just from overdrawing. So yeah, then none of these wires in guides, or they're not sort of located anywhere, and there's not double insulation. There's just, you're just relying really on that silicon jacket to not go through, not touch. These are moving up and down every time you take cells in and out as well, because they're sprung, so you will have some movement there. So it's not like once it's all in place it's never going to move and it just needs to stay there. There are things moving, so both these contacts are going up and down, not super often, but you know, at some point. Same as the 510 positive. Every time you screw an atomizer on and off, it's pushing the pin down and back. So yeah, I would like to see more separation, more insulation between all these wires at the top here. I mean, as I was saying, I like it. It's more simple. I think overall it'd be more reliable, but gotta think about these pins moving up and down, and vibrations, and you know, things fretting and touching, and the two springs that are there as well. Geekvape, I'm not sure about this. I just try to have a look at how they actually assemble it. I do like when the designs are made quite simply so they're easy to assemble, because the workers get rushed to knock out however many of these a day. They've got to smash them out. And I think if the designer can make it so they're easy to put together, easier to solder, that's going to give you a more reliable device. Because when they're rushed and don't have a whole lot of time, as long as the device is easy to put together, I think there's going to be less chances of things going wrong and things put together wrong. So it does look fairly straightforward the way this would go together. It is kind of nice to see when wire connections actually go through the board and they're soldered on the other side instead of a flat pad and then on top. They're a bit stronger, because if anything they're going to be pulling that way, and that's going to be stronger than pulling, if it was on a flat pad, they can lift up and they can pull the pad off the board. Whereas that should be a bit stronger, so that's not bad. And the solder joints look nice and clean, like where the manual soldering's been done. Quite clean. Now the board itself is dry. There's no conformal coating on there, which I kind of think is a little bit surprising. I mean, I know the device is meant to be sealed, but you'd think if you were kind of covering all your bases, you'd just put a conformal coating on the board, give it just that little bit of extra protection. Because the one thing you can say though also is if some liquid does get in through one of these seals, it's not going to evaporate out easily. It's just going to be stuck in there until it eventually just corrodes something. I do want to see the microcontroller, but yeah, sorry. As far as the board goes, all pretty standard. That's a good arrangement for the USB socket where they're flat against the board. That's good and strong. I've used a bigger tactile switch for the fire button than for the adjustment buttons, which is good because you obviously want the heavy duty switch on the one you're mashing all the time. Apart from that, it does look like just we're just standard DC converter, microcontroller under there, shunt resistor for the current measurement to the atomizer, MOSFETs, capacitors in the converter, and one big main inductor. So I'd say the board design is actually going to be pretty similar to their other devices. One little notable difference is there's your sensor for the magnetic switch, which is probably like a Hall effect sensor or something like that. It's measuring the magnetic field. So yeah, a little magnet. Once it passes over that guy, this little guy here, then the microcontroller can see that. Now, there's some weird stuff going on with Geekvape devices where some of them have really good TC, temperature control. Some are great, like the Aegis Mini, Solo, the Geekvape Nova. I think there's one other one I'm missing, but I can't remember. All those guys have really good temperature control, like almost DNA, evolved DNA level. And then you have the original Legend, the Blade, the X are all garbage TC, like just pretty much useless. Like don't bother. And the two models have different microcontrollers. Now I thought the Legend might use a cheaper or less powerful, less capable microcontroller. I thought, because it was common for one lot that used one type of microcontroller had the crap TC, and the other lot, the other grouping, had the different controller, and they all had great TC. But as it turns out, that the microcontroller in the group with the bad temperature control is actually a more capable unit than the one with good TC. So I don't know what the hell is going on, but at least this time we can look at, and in the Legend it was actually scrubbed off the microcontroller, so you couldn't see what model it was, but we did figure out it was a Nuvoton. And there's either an NUC 126 or an NUC 220, and I think it's actually the 126, which is a more powerful microcontroller, but I can't remember. Anyway, in this guy, it is an NUC 220. I'll put something on the screen to kind of explain that a little bit better. and then I'll probably end up sending this off to Aussie Geek Vapor in Sydney, and he can put it on the TC testing rig and tell us which version or which type of temperature control from Geekvape, whether it's got the good version or the crappy version. Because if you're into temperature control, or like even if you're not, if you can get a device that does it really well, it's definitely worth a shot, because you can actually get a good result rather than struggling with a device that does it badly when you're just learning temperature control. And if you like it, well, I mean, there's no point trying to see if you like it on something that doesn't do it properly. So interesting to know whether this will do good temperature control, and I'll do my best to report on that. Okay, so that just about does it as far as the disassembly. As always, I'm going to try and go through and do some charging tests and efficiency tests and all that sort of good stuff. But that will be, I'll get the video out first and then do all that stuff later. And if you check the description of this video, and there's a link there to a Reddit post where I've done the whole test. Obviously, I've done it. If you don't see it there, I haven't done it yet. So I'll update the description as soon as I've done some more testing and some, actual results on it. But like overall, there's some things I'm a bit sketchy on. I'm not 100% sold on this way of sealing the top just with a little piece of silicon. It does seem to me that I think this is actually rated at a higher ingress protection rating than the Legend, but I kind of find that hard to believe, because I feel like the Legend was better sealed. I think even around the screen, the thicker plate with the white silicon on it, and the top plate that was fully sealed, seemed like the Legend had better sealing to me, because this guy is just relying on this piece of silicon sealing through the screws, through that edge, making sure you don't pull up too far on there and open up a gap, because if you do, then that's ruined your ingress protection. Then you'll just get liquids straight into the board, and the board is not conformally coated, so it will be quite susceptible to corrosion and water liquid damage if stuff does get in there. And as I said, because there's no vent holes, no breathing in here, if you do get any liquid in there, it's going to stay in there and it's going to continue to ruin your device. So that's not cool. Other notable thing I'm not entirely cool with is the way all these wires at the top here there's no double insulation between them, and there's no guides to keep them apart. They're kind of just all in there. So as far as the safety thing, it could be better. They could be isolated better from each other. Some don't matter, like the 510 negative doesn't need to be isolated from the battery negative because they're actually joined anyway. But battery positive from obviously battery negative and 510 positive, really important you keep them isolated and make sure they can never touch. And like, it just looks like in some spots there's literally just one layer of insulation, and that's not a great thing. I think that could be better. They could be in little channels or little slots, or have a little clip or something that holds them apart, at least physical separation, or somehow have some dual insulation happening there. Would be nice to see, but I mean, it is also good to see that this is less complicated and, I think electrically better designed than the Legend, which, as I said, looks like it did have some problems due to that very complicated top assembly. And yeah, I'll leave it there. If anyone's got questions about it, feel free to hit me up in the comments. I'll do my best to reply. And yep, we'll see you next time. Thank you. Cheers.